Hello, Romantics. I'm Sarah Gomez, author, romance lover, and host. You're listening to Romancing the Story, a podcast centered around writing, reading, and story structure, all with a twist of romance.
We're at episode 48, and on today's episode, I chat with award-winning cozy mystery and romance writer Diane Kelly about the pros and cons of mixing genres. We discuss the versatility of cozy mystery, how writing romance led a path to writing cozies, and solving a murder mystery in the span of a book. I do apologize. There was some talk about furry companions later in the episode, and mine decided to appear. You might hear my dog Rocky in the background during one part. He thought the delivery truck drove by and was obviously protecting us. Great job, Rocky. If you're interested, links to connect to Diane, her books, and other mentions will be listed in the description. I do use Amazon affiliate links, so if you buy through the link, it helps the podcast and is always appreciated. You know, I hear from authors all the time about the struggle to write a solid book blurb. It's the first impression readers have of your story and helps represent you as an author. What if you could learn to write highly marketable book blurbs every time? What if you knew exactly how to capture readers and make them need to buy your book? Allow me to introduce Book Blurb Magic, a complete system for self-publishing authors, copywriters, and freelancers to write book blurbs that sell. Created by our friend Jessie, who was a guest on the podcast, Book Blurb Magic is your solution to creating eye-catching book descriptions that hook readers in and convert clicks to sales. The course has bite-sized video lessons explaining key blurb writing techniques. Also included are downloadable cheat sheets and PDF templates, plus much more. The course is already super affordable, but if you use the code ROMANCETHESTORY, you'll get 10% off the course. That's Romance the Story in all caps. Visit bookblurbmagic.com to get started, and links and details will also be available in the description of the episode. With that said, let's jump right in. Welcome, award-winning author Diane Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. I'm thrilled to be on your show.
Well, I am so excited to have you because, like I said, apparently Cozy Mysteries is a really big hit. So in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your writing?
Sure. It's been an interesting journey. So I kind of came up through romance channels. I started out writing what probably would have been called chick lit back in the day. Now it's generally called contemporary romance. I was a member of the Dallas area romance authors. I eventually was on the Romance Writers of America board. And that's where I learned to write. I learned so much from that organization. And I do have several standalone romances. They all have a lot of humor in them. They run the gamut from just, funny contemporary romances to a couple with a little bit of kind of a paranormal element. I have one called Love, Luck, and Little Green Men that has a St. Patrick's Day theme. That was actually my attempt to chase the romance market. Dark paranormals with like werewolves and stuff were really big when I first started writing. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just try. Well, I can't be that dark, I've discovered. So it had a leprechaun in it, and it ended up being a lot of fun. And then I have another romance called Almost an Angel, where a woman is reincarnated. She dies, goes to heaven, and is given a second chance. I love redemption stories. So those are my romances. But then my first series that got picked up by a traditional publisher was my Death and Taxes series. And I had worked as a tax advisor prior to that. And so I kind of drew on my experience with white collar crime and writing that series. And my main character is this very spunky, feisty girl. And I figured she needed a guy to be teamed up with so that, they can do all these fun things together. So that is a very heavily romantic subplot in that book. It's almost 50-50 romance and the crime capers. Then my second series is my Paw Enforcement series. That one has a female canine team, female police officer, female canine in Fort Worth, Texas, where I used to live right in the suburbs of Fort Worth. And that one is very heavily romance too. Not quite as much as my first series, but very heavily romance. She and her dog double date with a bomb squad officer and his bomb sniffing dogs. Now, those two, even though a lot of cozy readers read those series, there was bad language in those and some sensuality. So they don't fall as neatly into the cozy genre, even though you look at the covers and you think, oh, those are cozy covers. They were a little bit pushing the envelope. My 4 series since then have been more, pretty much specifically cozies. That was my House Flipper series, which is set in Nashville and stars a female carpenter who flips houses with her cousin, who's also a carpenter. My Southern Homebrew series, my Moonshine series, which I loved moonshine, learned about it when I lived in Nashville. So I had to write about that. And I've got that one. And then my Busted series is one I published independently. It features a different female motorcycle cop in each book. And then my final series, my most recent one, is my Mountain Lodge Mysteries. And those are set in Beach Mountain, North Carolina, which is in Western North Carolina, right on the Tennessee border. A beautiful area in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Well, and I love that you kind of experimented and then you kind of found a really good niche, because when I was actually looking up all your backlist and all your catalog, I saw that it was mostly cozies. That's the first thing, at least, that popped up for me.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely the bulk of my work is cozy mysteries.
Did you kind of find too that you enjoyed writing cozies? Is that kind of where you kind of leaned in? Because I like the idea of authors finding their niche and finding where they can really thrive as an author.
I have found that it's a really good fit for me because I always like to put animals in my books, and cozies almost always. There's maybe a few that don't have a cat or a dog or a hamster or something, but I love to put them in there. And sometimes I even like to put chapters from their point of view or their perspective. So that's good. I like to have romance in my books for sure, but I also like to feature a woman's career, show how smart she is, because I've been lucky to have a lot of really smart women as friends, and I like when we get together and we talk about things and do things. So I like to feature strong women in my characters who are smart, or in my books who are smart. So in cozy mysteries, it seems like the women are always very intelligent. They're not clumsy and clunky. Generally, for the most part, they're good thinkers. They can deduce clues. They notice things, and so it ended up being a really good fit for what I want to write.
After I interviewed Amber for our cozy mystery episode, I started reading more cozy mysteries and kind of diving more into them. And I found that, it really highlights how female protagonists specifically can be like super smart and clever and like really utilizing their resources. And I thought that was like a really fantastic way to kind of bring out like character development in a protagonist, and kind of character build. You have a wonderful cozy mystery series, like you were mentioning, with several romance angles, a relationship between a sleuth and a mounted police officer. And you were mentioning, the trusty sidekick with the furry companion, the cat, has a crush on a police horse. So cute. That's not to speak of all the side character storylines you have going on. There's so many opportunities for showing connections in your book. Why was it important to include so many various types of romance relationships in your series?
I'm real big on character. My stories always start with a character. So that, any idea I have is this character walks into my mind, and I really like them to be very fully formed and 3-dimensional. And, not everyone has to have a life partner, but most of us like to have that. There's a lot of benefits to it. There's a lot of aggravations too, but hey, that's great for a story also. So I kind of want to draw my characters being more 3-dimensional. And also one thing, I'm 55 now. My husband and I have been married 31 years. And I've noticed, our relationship has gone through so many phases, and there's pluses and minuses of every phase. You have that first, crush, and it's new and exciting. And then you get to where you're just so busy, you hardly have time for each other, especially if you have kids and things like that. Life can get busy in careers. And then you get to rediscover each other when life starts slowing down again. And that was really fun. That's actually when a lot of people split up. And that's what happened in my Mountain Lodge series. Was after the boys were out of the house, they kind of went, maybe this isn't quite right anymore. And that's perfectly fine too. If that, I was happily discovered that my husband and I were like, hey, I remember you. So it's fun to me to kind of show all those different phases of relationships in the story. We've got in the Southern Homebrew series, the Moonshine series, Hattie has this new burgeoning relationship with the Mounted Police Officer, Marlon Landers. So that's kind of new and flirty and fun. Her friend Kiki is kind of at the sort of comfort stage holding pattern with her boyfriend, Max. Hattie's friend, Kate, has just had a baby. So she's at that phase of her relationship. And then, of course, the cat has the crush on a police horse. And unfortunately, that's going to be unrequited love.
I mean, we got to fit that in somewhere, right? That's just part of it. Sometimes we just unrequited.
Even Granddaddy, he's this irascible old guy, and he loved his wife, but she's been gone 10 years, and he's starting to think about maybe dipping his toe in that water. So that was fun too, just showing how that can be something that people deal with all lifelong in different ways.
I've heard a lot of people too talk about romance as you get older. So I love that you've been able to kind of fit that in also into your series, because I've heard a lot of that in the romance community. Over 50 romances have been kind of gaining more and more traction. So I think that's kind of really awesome that you've been able to kind of fit all those different types of relationships in your book. And when I was learning more about cozy mysteries, that's kind of a hallmark, is to have those relationships in there, that romance element, though it doesn't take primary precedence over like the plot.
And they're perfect for people who don't like graphic, sexual stuff on the page, because usually cozies are not going to mention much detail at all. So people who like sweet romances, cozies are a really good option for them. I think, for that reason, that it's usually very light and closed door, if anything's even referenced at all.
It doesn't get too dark either. You had mentioned that your other series with like the canine and the officer got a little dark, and it seemed a little out of the box, at least for the cozy mystery genre expectations.
Right. Those ones dealt with some crimes that were, they weren't even always murders, but they were things that could be pretty upsetting. Usually in cozies, if someone dies, they generally deserved it, and we're not too sad that they're gone.
Right. And it's like, even though there's murder involved and a mystery, it's still light and fluffy. It's still a little, the cozy. It's the cozy part of the mystery, of the cozy mysteries. You do a lot of genre mixing in your series. So much cozy mystery to unpack and so many great relationships to get invested in. And you do a fabulous job of balancing the two. What does your process look like when mixing genres? And was that always the way you wanted to tell the Southern homebrew moonshine mysteries?
Definitely when I set out writing that book, I felt the same way that I did with my very first series, my Death in Texas series, where I knew that, a modern day moonshiner is going to be someone who's going to be pretty spunky, pretty feisty. And I thought it'd be really fun to pair her up with someone and kind of see how that goes, whether he can handle her. So, and she pushes the limit with Marlon. She does things he doesn't necessarily want her doing, taking risks and things like that. But I love weaving all that together. I feel like, the romantic subplot always goes slower than the crime plot, because the crime has to be resolved during that book. But the romance is kind of an arc over the entire series. So it goes a little bit slower. So I weave that in just, little bit by little bit. That's part of it. I love how weaving them together can help build suspense, because I can have the police officer worry about her. What's going to happen? She worries about what he's doing. Is she going to make him mad when she's doing things he's told her not to do? And then also, it kind of just fleshes out the book too. I think, in the characters, as I mentioned earlier, it shows that she's got, a lot going on, and isn't just about the moonshine, isn't just about solving the mystery. She's also about, finding a partner for life. And is this person gonna fit with her, given how lively she can be?
Well, and that's something I actually learned about cozies, was the relationship aspect going a bit slower, simply because, like you said, it has to reach an arc over the series, because once you kind of give that romance to the protagonist, readers can drop off. And so that's what kind of Amber had mentioned to me. And I thought that was really important to think about when you're writing a cozy mystery. And so I'm kind of curious, what book are you on right now? I know Primer and Punishment just released. And what book is that in the series?
That is book 5. And so that series has been fun because I not only have the romance between my main character, Whitney Whitaker, who is the carpenter, and the homicide detective, Colin Flynn, but I also have that Whitney's best friend, Colette, and Whitney's cousin, Buck, end up getting together. And they actually have their wedding in Primer and Punishment. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh, how fun. Yeah, that does sound fun to kind of integrate that all in there. And do you plot out kind of like the romantic piece of it, like ahead of time and say like, okay, I don't want them getting together until later on, or does that kind of organically happen? Because I know I talked to Amber about it and she had already charted it out for quite a few books.
I'm normally a very big plotter when it comes book by book. But as far as the series, no, because you never know how long a publisher is going to run a series. Of course, now, if they decide not to continue a series, with the indie options, we can always, do that. In fact, that's what I'm going to do with my Paw Enforcement series. My publisher decided, let's move on to something else. And they had me start my Mountain Lodge series. And, but I feel like there was, I feel like I left it hanging because they had just gotten engaged at the end of the last book. So I'm like, I've got to at least have Pawfully Wedded and get them wedded. But I've had a lot of people asking about that. So I might continue that series after the romantic arc is tied up. Because again, like I said, I love all those different phases. So even after people get married, I think some people do feel like, oh, they're married, they're finally together. Let's drop off. I've feel fulfilled, by that story. But other people want to see, okay, now they're going to start having those, issues that married people have in their romantic relationship. Maybe let's see that. So yeah, so I don't plot the romance over the entire series because I don't know how long it's going to be, but I kind of try to see how it fits in with the story, the crime mystery that's in the book, how much I can weave in and how much to develop it then. And in fact, in the House Flipper series, I would say it went surprisingly a little quicker than I expected.
That's so cool that you actually have it kind of charted out like book by book. And we can always take relationships to a different level, right? Once we married, that's not the end all be all. Like you said, I love you mentioned it before, relationships ebb and flow. And I think sometimes we get the butterflies in our stomach because we're just like, oh my gosh, it's new love. It's so sweet and it's so wonderful. But then there are different phases where that love deepens and it changes over time.
Oh, and I'm actually really excited because my husband and I are going to an 80s prom next weekend. Oh my gosh. At a ski resort. And, that was the decade when we fell in love. So all the music we danced to at the nightclubs, I'm like, hey, we can kind of relive that romance and go back, now many pounds later, many years later.
Yeah. And that's such a fun thing to like, you can also like reconnect in, and you can even integrate that into your books. I love the shift has been to mix genres more and more in books. I'm just seeing it pop up just kind of everywhere. In fact, when I talk to a lot of different authors, they kind of pitch their book as like, oh, it's this genre mixed with this genre. So do you think mixing genres is an effective way for writers to approach their stories? There seems to be a lot of benefit from it.
I do. And I think that when independent publishing or self-publishing became a real viable option, that opened the door, because it used to be that, and I think it still is with traditional publishers, they generally, not always, but generally tend to prefer that a book fall specifically within a specific genre guidelines, because that way they know how to pitch it to the bookstores know where to put it on the shelf. And in fact, my first series, my Death in Texas, because it was so heavily romance and crime caper, they kind of weren't sure what to do with it. And I did have some rejections that just kind of said, it's not clear what this is supposed to be, and then luckily I found an editor who took a chance on it and we had a lot of fun, and they did end up putting it in mystery because it had a crime element to it. And I think that was probably the best place to put it. But I do think, very few readers read only in one genre. So I think mixing genres is a way to use the best elements of each genre to make a new super genre. You can have the emotion and the angst and the personal intimate details of a romance, but you can also have the cerebral part of a mystery and solving clues and put that together. Because just like I said, I want my characters to be multidimensional. People are, readers are, and they, I think, like to have, all those different elements, hit too. I think it makes them more relatable. It makes them more creative, when we can mix things up and not have to stay within a box. We get to be more creative that way, which is, I think, very, very fun. But there is, some downsides. I have had a few readers that say they don't like romance in a cozy, so there are some purists, even though I think a lot of people, do read broader. There are some who are very much, they want their book to be this kind of book, they want their expectations to be met. And if it's a cozy, they don't want any heavy romance. Light romance is okay. Contemporary romance, nothing too dark. They really want to know what they're getting themselves into. So for those people, they're probably going nuts with all the cross genre stuff that's going on right now. But there's still enough books that fit neatly in the genres, that there's plenty for them, plenty of the cross genre stuff too. But I think the cross genre stuff is really fun. And I think Colleen Hoover, her name's everywhere now, but I think she's an example of that because she writes across the board and does a lot of different things. And readers have followed her, from book to book, even though they're different genres. So I think, she's doing something right, the emotional stuff. And
there is a way to mix genres, and there's a successful way to do that. Like you said, maybe like parts of that elements in there, as opposed to like veering too far off the beaten genre path.
But it's interesting because I have, several friends that I knew from romance writing circles who are segueing into cozy mysteries. And I think it's kind of a to a certain degree, kind of almost a natural progression because, when we're younger and, have more hormones going on, we love the romance and we want that to be very exciting and front and center. And then as we get older and we're, more mature in our relationships, it's like, we still want it to be there, but maybe just on a lesser scale. So it's been interesting seeing that because I've had a couple of my romance writer friends reach out to me and go, hey, tell me about this cozy stuff. I want to try this. And I think it's fun for writers. We don't want to be put in boxes. We want to have the freedom to try different things. So it's fun to have more than one genre that we can play with. It's like having more than one toy and more than one tool in our toolbox, and makes it more fun for us when we get to mix things up a bit.
I love that you mentioned too that romance and a lot of the cozy mysteries can kind of go hand in hand in a way. And that's kind of a natural evolution, or it can be for a lot of writers, because you're right. I've noticed that there's a lot of people, especially like I'm just going to take my mom and my sisters as examples, because I know that they're like really into true crime. That's kind of become more and more prominent over the last like probably 5 to 10 years. And I thought that was really funny. And I feel like that is kind of almost an integration of like, okay, we have romantic elements, like we have a little bit of a little bit of crime involved, and there's a solving aspect. So I feel like the cozy mystery is kind of like tailor-made for kind of that demographic that like, I want the romance, I want the mysteries, but I don't necessarily want the romance to take the main stage. I want to help like solve that crime.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, true crime is huge. And I think people like to see justice done. I think that's part of it. This makes me think back onto an interview I heard with Janet Ivanovich on NPR years ago, but she talked about how, she started out in romance and then segued, of course, into her crime series. And she said, before menopause, she was, was thinking, oh, romance. And then menopause hit and she's like, now I want to kill people, something. I'm paraphrasing, but I thought, Well, yeah, I think, you want to see how it can be solved. Of course, it's always easier in hindsight, hindsight's 2020, but you want to be right there and see justice done, especially when it's female victims, I think too, in a lot of true crime, it is female victims. I think we as women, we like to see that justice is done, and we want to make sure that we look out for each other. And that's kind of a way to do it. I know my sister, she's a nurse, and she used to read a lot of books about nurses that did true crimes. And at first I thought, oh, that's kind of creepy. But I thought, I think she's trying to understand why her coworkers would do this, not direct coworkers, but people who went into her profession, because you would think, oh, nurses and doctors, they're trying to save lives, not take lives, so I think it was kind of like my fascination when I used to do tax work with white collar crime. You're kind of going, wait, these are my people. why are they doing this in such a different way than I would ever do it? I would never take this career path and turn it into something so bad and evil and awful. And I think we feel, and I even put this in the beginning of my paw enforcement series, I have my cop think this, that if we feel like we can understand the criminal mind and what makes them tick, we somehow feel like we can solve the crime problem. But I don't think that's true, because I think a lot of people, to some degree, yes, but I think a lot of people just are born damaged, psychopaths. There's not a way to cure that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that's always something that'll happen, right? Whether we like it or not, it's just crime and injustice done against other people. So why not see if we can, the armchair detective, see if we can help out, and there has been a rise of that, which I think is really cool too, is like a lot of cold cases can get solved by people who are just really passionate about trying to solve crimes.
Well, and people notice different things. I mean, two people can look at the same picture or go on the same vacation and come back with very different stories about what things were, or very different things that they noticed. So I do think having multiple eyes on something is always, a good thing. And I kind of try to bring that up in my books actually too, where, the police have certain processes that they use and certain ways of looking at things, and they're trained police officers, and they also have limitations legally, what they can do. They have to have probable cause before they can search someone's home, but an amateur sleuth can just barge right in and trespass, if they want to risk that. So in a way they have a little more freedom, but I try to point out, like, if for instance, if there's a financial aspect to the crime, that sometimes, if my character is a small business owner, she's going to notice that aspect or that angle potentially, maybe more than a police officer who's trained more of, look at the violence or, something. So they can kind of help the official police officers, official law enforcement, by just giving a different perspective.
You bring up a good point. Since you kind of think of all these different aspects, is writing a cozy mystery different? Like, the process look different than writing a romance for you?
Very, very different. With romance, you kind of have that line, and it goes up and down, as they ebb and flow and they have conflict and things like that. But generally, it's two people and they're on that path together, even if it's a winding path. With cozy mysteries, and in fact, after I wrote my first two series, even though they were, crime series, mystery series, they were usually more straightforward. Like in my Death and Taxes series, often she knew who she was after. She just had to build her case. So they were a little more procedural. In the Paw Enforcement series, same thing. She didn't know necessarily who she was after, but she was amassing clues. She didn't necessarily have a bunch of suspects right off the bat. But with cozies, it's a different ballgame. And when I wrote my first cozy, which was Dead as a Door Knocker, the first of my House Flipper series, I kind of freaked out because I'm like, oh my gosh, my usual method is not working. I can't handle having 5 or 6 suspects, because that's normal for a cozy, is you have 5 or 6 suspects kind of right off the bat. And trying to weave all their stories, all of a sudden there was so much more weaving that had to be done. And those winding paths were crossing each other and weaving. And it just like, I kind of freaked out. But I just had to sit down and kind of come up with a new process. I'd always been a plotter, very much did outlines, very detailed outlines. And I just kind of had to learn how to do it in a more manageable way with that many characters. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll either on a piece of paper or index cards, I'll write down, for a particular suspect, what are, the 5 or 6 beats for that suspect? Why do they, what's their beef with the victim? So there's got to be some kind of conflict there. What, 3 or 4 things make them look suspicious, and then what clears them. And so I do that for all the different ones. And then I'll either lay out the index cards and kind of go, oh, okay, I could put this here and then that here and that here, or I do that on a piece of paper. Either way, it's actually easier with index cards, because on a piece of paper, I end up with too many things, lines going 10 different directions. And I'm like, what did I do? But sometimes I'll do, I learned this great outlining method. And I want to say it was from Joanne Pence, but I can't swear to it. But I was at a Kiss of Death conference years and years ago in San Antonio before I ever got published. And Kiss of Death is a chapter of Romance Writers of America that deals with romantic mysteries, romantic suspense. She said she had gotten this outlining method from a different author. So this is third hand. But she said she would put the scene number. So scene 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then the day and date that the scene is happening, which that has saved me many times, because it's super easy to get your chronology off, or to accidentally put, too much happening in one day that could never really all happen in one day. But when you actually see it laid out like that, it's easier. So scene number, day, date. Then the third column on the spreadsheet is the people that are in the scene. So you list the characters that are in the scene. The fourth column is the setting. So, interior office, sunny day, sun coming through the window, or chatter down the hall. You can hear the copier. I'll put a little details like that I'll remember to add some stuff to the scene to bring the scene alive. And, maybe if it's outside, maybe it's cold, it's raining, it's so hot, that in Texas that it feels like her clothes are sticking to her back, that kind of thing. And then the last column on the spreadsheet is what happens in that scene. So it's the action. Sometimes if I've thought of a particularly good piece of dialogue, I'll go ahead and write that in there so that I have that, ready to put into the story. And I'll go through 3 or 4 iterations of that spreadsheet. First I do that whole thing with the index cards and do it out. Then that gets kind of transferred to the spreadsheet as a more formal final outline. But I'll go through 3 or 4 iterations of that. And I even revise it as I go along, because sometimes I'll be like, oh, you know what? It might be better if I move that sooner, or, oh, I could also do this and I need to add something in. So even though I am very much a planner, there's still surprises that pop up and changes that happen. And it's kind of a constant evolution. It just gives me a kind of a roadmap to set out on. But sometimes I do take detours, or the scenic route, the back bumpy dirt road that I wasn't planning on.
Well, and I'm always curious on how like people can do the cozy mysteries in particular, because there are a lot of elements. Like you do have the romantic element, but you primarily have to have that mystery. And I feel like that's what's kind of going to keep us turning the page, is not just the relationship, but part of that mystery too. You have to keep the integrity of that. And right. I love that you kind of plotted out with different people, like why they're the suspect and then what evidently clears them, because I feel like as a reader, I love mysteries, but like when you get to the end, I don't want to feel like it's like shoehorned in there.
It needs to be there. It just needs to be hidden among, kind of like, where's Waldo? You can find Waldo, but he's hidden in there among all the people that kind of look like Waldo and all that. Well, this is kind of just an aside, but one thing I've discovered, just getting my editorial letters back from my editor is I tend to be one of those authors. I'm kind of like a cat that likes to play with the mouse for a long time. So I tend to have a pretty long runway before I kill my characters. And I often get, can you kill them a little sooner? But to me, for one, I think it's easier. So maybe it's a little bit of a cop-out to have stuff happen in advance that kind of starts setting up that conflict and stuff. But it's hard when somebody's dead to show interesting conflict, in my opinion, between the dead person and the suspects. So I like to show that conflict happening beforehand so that the reader's reading, and, of course the reader knows what's coming. The characters in the book don't. The reader knows that person's going to end up dead. And so maybe this is a clue. So I like to sprinkle some of that in beforehand and then, also afterward.
It's not the destination, it's the journey. So
right.
Like we know ultimately how it's going to end, but we just want to be along for the ride and right. enjoy it when it's there. Because right. that's always my favorite part of kind of a mystery, is kind of unpacking, okay, who done it? And even if they tell us who done it in the beginning or like somewhere in the middle, I'm like, well, how did they do it now? That's what I kind of want to know. And I'm curious about like what are the circumstances that led up to that?
I always love too when a red herring that seems like, oh, that's a piece of evidence. It's got to be them. And then you find out, oh, well, that makes perfect sense why this odd thing happened now that I know, this new information, but it really pointed to that character as the killer, earlier. I always think that that's really fun to kind of learn the more backstory about the characters and why their clue seems so right.
That's a great point. And how do you kind of lead into a red herring? How do you kind of construct that? Because you don't want, I would figure you don't want to lean in too heavily into that. You kind of want to lead the reader that maybe it was this person, but then you obviously, like you said, you have to clear them. And so does that one look a little different when you're kind of setting that up?
Right. So when I'm going through those, 5 or 6 beats with each character, I think of, okay, here's their conflict with the person who dies. Here's the clues that make them look guilty. I always have to think of, okay, those are the clues. What is an explanation for those clues that has nothing to do with killing the person? Maybe it's just that they wanted that person to suffer harm or embarrassment or financial ruin or something else, but they didn't mean to kill him, so they were actually still doing something to the victim, but just not to the level of killing him. Or maybe it's something else entirely and it just looked really guilty, but wasn't, once you knew. But that's it can be tricky because you don't want it to feel contrived. And I think that can happen sometimes where things feel a little too like, oh, well, there's no way that would really get resolved in that way. You want it to make sense, which sometimes that's difficult because, in reality, if somebody dies, there's probably not going to be 5 or 6, potential suspects, unless they were just a horrible, horrible person, which of course, in cozies, a lot of times they are, but there's maybe, 2 or 3 serious suspects. And it's interesting too, I've attended a lot of courses that put on by law enforcement and like the Writers Police Academy and things like that. And it's interesting when you hear from detectives and police when they know in their gut, in their heart, in their mind that somebody did something, who the killer is, but they just can't amass the evidence and the frustration of that. I'm glad we get to do justice in our books because I can't imagine how frustrating that would be, especially, when they've dedicated their careers and their lives to trying to make sure that justice is done.
Right. And there is I think you do develop some type of intuition as I would imagine as a police officer after seeing it so many times that you're just like, I do know it's this person. I'm pretty sure, but I just can't find the evidence to support it.
I read a really interesting book and it was called How to Read Anybody or something like that. And it talked about how people respond to things and what it means. And it was really interesting because there was even one like, if 2 people who broke up run into each other and one of them says, oh, how are you doing? You got exciting plans for the weekend? And the first one says, oh yeah, I'm doing this. And then one goes, well, I've got plans too, because blah, blah, blah. That means they still care about the person. But if they're just kind of like, oh, okay, great. Well, have a great time. Then they're over it. And I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. How there's still this like competition after that, you hurt me and I have to get back at you. But if they really let it go, they can be happy for that person or just, move on. So I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. That was one of my takeaways from that was that book and read it again. Because I remember thinking, wow, this is all such good stuff. And some of it stuck with me and some of it did not. That'd probably be a good primer to go and look at again.
Yeah. That sounds like a great book. Something I do like to do as well or especially it's just for me. I don't know. Maybe a mystery is in my future. I don't know, cozy mystery, because it's so enticing now. But something I love to do is I love to go down the rabbit hole of watching like YouTube videos. And I've watched so many of like FBI agents talking about like body language, especially for killers and people who've committed crimes and stuff like that when they're interrogating them. They've even shown like clips and stuff of like the moment they knew that this is the person they're looking for. It's fascinating to me. And so easy, like so much can be said in just movements, tone, and everything. There was even one about a white collar crime.
Yeah, I think people have a hard time if they're guilty. They're so busy trying to cover up what they did that they don't act normally. So I think the police sometimes clue in like, okay, a normal person would ask, X, Y, or Z. They'd be curious. But when people already know what happened, sometimes they're not curious and they don't ask. And that can be kind of a tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's really fascinating. Anyone who is writing a mystery, highly recommend it. It's just like, it's such a deep dive and it's so interesting to me, just as someone who, like you said, is like, you learn to people read. And that's, I think, part of cozy mystery too, especially why you're going to be such a good sleuth, is there's some innate ability to people read, I think, usually for the protagonist.
Yeah. And motivation is so interesting because to me, sometimes, it's interesting if you can make the mechanics of the murder different or interesting, or sometimes even funny. The one I'm working on right now is going to have a tad bit of humor to it, which maybe that's kind of, morbid humor, but it helps me deal with the fact that I'm killing people. But to me, when I read a lot of books on criminal psychology when I started writing this stuff, and determining a motive for the killer is always interesting. Is it greed? Is it love? Is it hate? Was something taken from them? Is it jealousy? Is it to cover something else up? There's so many reasons why someone would take someone else's life when it's premeditated that it's fun to kind of explore that. And I think we all have a breaking point too, where we could snap and kill someone. So sometimes it's fun to explore that, what is the trigger for this particular person that could make them go over the edge. Like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Bernie. It was a fascinating case in East Texas. I used to live in Texas, and this guy he was a funeral director, and everyone in this little town, and I can't remember what town it was. I want to say Karnak, but I'm not sure. But everyone just loved this guy, nicest guy. And he ended up in, probably just a friendly relationship with an older, wealthy woman in town. And he became just kind of her companion, and they traveled and did all this stuff. Well, she ended up dead. I guess she just disappeared at first. And it turned out, I'm going to ruin the story for you, but it's still worth watching because it's interesting. She pushed him too far, and he snapped one night and killed her. And the funny thing is they actually tried to move the trial out of that county. Normally they say, someone can't get a fair trial because people are so upset and angry at the suspect that there's no way that they're going to be able to even look at the evidence. But it was the exact opposite. There was everybody loved this guy, and they're like, we can't get a fair trial for the victim because they're going to let him go. He's too nice. So they moved it. But that's good weekend movie, Weekend with Bernie. But it was very well done. And it was interesting because after that, there was, he ended up getting life in prison, and people felt like that wasn't fair because he did snap. He did not premeditate to kill her. And he had some bad circumstances in his background that would cause him to snap under certain circumstances. So I believe he either got freed or got his sentence reduced afterward.
And that's fascinating too, to like integrate those motivations into a book and like how to weave that through. We're getting back on the track of romance after murder now. We're pivoting back, right? We went murder. Now let's go romance just a little bit more again. In your series, romance is also used as a device to help move the mystery plot. We have the motivations, but we also want to integrate a little bit more of that romance because, like you said, it's kind of or like we mentioned, it was a hallmark a little bit of the cozy mystery. Your protagonist, Hattie, flirts with a suspect for information. It's great out of like box thinking. I love that you utilize that as a kind of like a romance, but not in the way you would think. So romantic elements can be used for more than just community building and connection. How do you think authors can use romance for more than just connection to build a cozy mystery?
Well, I had fun. I had fun with that because when people are trying to get to know each other and they're being flirty, and that's kind of how she was being, trying to get information, they're a little off guard. He's thinking romance, and she's thinking, I'm trying to get clues out of you. So she could kind of, throw him a little bit off with that. And she even plied him with a moonshine drink, beforehand to try to loosen his lips a little. It can also give characters a chance to kind of grow closer, the romance aspect as they discuss a case. It's a good way to, well, what do you think? Well, what would be fair? Well, why would people treat each other like this? And they kind of see how they kind of learn about how each other looks at relationships, when they're discussing things like that. So I think those ways, it kind of, you can use romance, for that. You can use romance. I think I mentioned this earlier, but to build suspense, if you take the character basically totally out of the crime story and give them kind of a break. I mean, because sometimes, like if you're watching a movie or reading a story and it's just nonstop, especially if it's a darker cozy, it can feel a little overwhelming to be in that. And we need some, comic relief is kind of one example, but romantic relief, I think, is another example that, okay, we've had enough of the death and the angst and the grief. Let's do something kind of lighter, and let's show that life is not all bad. Let's go and let's play in the daisies for a while. So I think it can give the reader some relief, and even the thinking, romance is more about the heart than the head a lot of times. So if, the reader's having to kind of put all these clues together and remember who was where, what, when, why, where it's starting to feel like work, I think a romantic, scene can kind of go, okay, here's your break. Here's your coffee break.
Well, and I love sometimes in those procedurals, if like a lot of times, like somebody's working really hard on like a mystery, and there, like you said, there's a lot of like very morbid, a lot of intense stuff going on, like sometimes recentering them and like seeing them like with their family or with a loved one kind of reminds me as part of the audience, oh, this is why they're doing it though, to keep those people safe, or even the family members from the maybe the victim's family. Like there's a little bit of like connection there. It's not sad necessarily, but just like a connection point of that's right. That's why they're doing it, to help solve this murder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And to make the world a better place, more just place. We all would love to have a world where there wasn't even a need for justice, to be honest. I mean, I always think that's like, I wish we didn't have the word justice because I wish we didn't have a need for it. I wish everything was just fair right off the bat and everybody treated each other well and there weren't, horrible things happening. But that's not the cards we've been dealt. We have to deal with the ones we've been dealt. But yeah, they do this because they want to be an instrument of change and good and make the world better.
So you might have heard my furry sidekicks earlier, but a little bit, and I apologize for that. They get a little, they hear a door close and they're just like, what is that? Protection mode.
I'm actually surprised mine have been so quiet, but they're all napping now. Nobody's climbed on me. So be some quiet and get some work done.
I know, you're safe for the moment, but you have like furry sidekicks. And of course you said furry sidekicks are always fun to write and they regularly feature in cozies. So I love you gave the cat a crush. It's adorable. It's so clever, so cute. Did you go into the series with like that idea in mind, or did Smokey the cat's crush kind of organically come to you as you developed the series?
It just organically came to me because when I'm writing each scene, before I sit down to write it, I kind of play it through my head, almost like a movie or, a TV show, because I want to visualize what's going on. It helps me kind of go, oh, wait, look what's happening over there. What's happening here? So Smokey is always in the window. My cats are like that at home. They're always wanting to be in the window and watching what's going on outside. So when he's in the Moonshine Shack, which is Hattie's moonshine shop, he's always in the front window. It's a bay window and he's looking out. And Marlon, the mounted police officer, when he comes, he ties his horse, Charlotte, to the post out front. So I thought, as I was visualizing this, I'm like, oh, the horse is right outside the window. Smokey's in the window. I'm like, oh, it'd be so cute if he's like gazing out at her and thinking, she's beautiful. I love her. I want to make you mine.
Well, and that's such a cat thing to do. I had a cat for 20 years and she was my baby, but like, that's such a cat thing to do. The cat usually picks a person or sometimes another animal's their person. and for some reason they're like obsessed with that, usually person or animal. So.
Yes. Smokey, a lot of the time I have him be very aloof. So he's not necessarily super loving with Hattie. So this is a way to kind of show his vulnerable side too. And it's funny, I've got 3 dogs and one of them is a shepherd and he's a very smart dog, but he's kind of a jerk. He's very demanding. When I'm making his breakfast, he stands right next to me and he barks like, hurry up, lady, you're not close enough, or fast enough, get it to me now. I want it right now. And, if he doesn't want to go outside, he'll, I'll try to coax him. And I finally have to raise my voice. And I'm like, why do you make me raise my voice? I don't want to raise my voice. But the one super, not his only redeeming quality, he can be sweet when he wants to be, but what is to me his most redeeming quality is he is so sweet to, when we've brought kittens in the house, he is so sweet to them. All of a sudden you see this whole other side of Junior. And I mostly realized it the first time we brought a kitten in was when we lived in Burleson, Texas, just outside Fort Worth. And our neighbor boys brought this kitten over and their parents knew we had a bunch of cats. And they said, our mom told us to bring you this kitten. And someone had foisted onto them. So we brought the kitten in and the kitten was just fearless and just, walked right through the living room, went right up to Junior and Junior gave him a lick and was wagging his tail. It was very gentle with him and so excited. It was just the sweetest thing to see. So I like to be able to kind of show some of those funny things, and I love those YouTube videos with funny animal pairings and stuff, where you don't expect these 2 animals to become friends, but they do, even, if they're usually ones that one would be eating the other, something like that. I like that they recognize, I was about to say the humanity in each other, but that's not the life force, the individuality, personality.
Maybe the soul in each other, just like, yes. Hey, you're kind of like me. I like you for some reason or another.
Right. And it's interesting, just like with the human characters, to show they have friendships and they have, romantic interests, because I think that's natural for animals too, even if they're spayed or neutered, which I hope they all are.
You bring up a wonderful point. If you're integrating like a animal usually into your book, either cozy mystery or otherwise, it's important if they're kind of like a curmudgeon-y type of like animal of some sort, that it's important to have some type of like little redeeming quality, or like you said, the most redeeming quality that we see like through like little segments here and there, right?
Something to make them more lovable. People love Sawdust in my House Flipper series. He has chapters from his point of view. He was the little runt, and he is just a sweet, sweet cat. So people love him. Yeti in my Mountain Lodge series, she's very arrogant. She thinks the world revolves around her, and she's been a little less well received. But that was kind of my point in writing her was we've had cats like that.
Everyone knows a cat like that. Everyone, everyone who's owned a cat, especially, knows that.
Yes, so. It's been fun in the book I'm working on now. I've toned her down just a little bit. I show that she's super excited that Misty's sons are coming to stay at the lodge for their break from college over their Christmas holiday. And she's very excited about that. So that kind of softens her a little bit, that she does have humans that she adores, but Misty is her servant.
So during my talk about Cozy Mysteries with Amber Royer, we discussed the community aspect. Since you did a lot of fantastic work integrating romantic elements into your series, how did you go about building the community? Is it placed in a small town, or does the protagonist Hattie have community that follows her?
Yeah, so in my Moonshine series, my Southern Homebrew Moonshine series, Hattie does have a great community. She was born and raised in Chattanooga, went to college in Chattanooga, still lives in Chattanooga, established her moonshine shop in Chattanooga, which is great for being able to have long-term friendships. So her best friend, Kiki, they've been friends since second grade, since Kiki immigrated from Japan. And I love getting to throw in, characters that are not cookie cutters of my main character, even though, in real life, a lot of us have, it's fun to have friends that you can relate to, that have similar backgrounds and stuff like that. But it's also really fun to have friends that are different, that you can learn from. And, I've got a little bit of both in my life, and I want to give my characters that too. So Kiki is very, even though Hattie kind of has her feisty and spunky side too, and is very businesslike, Kiki even takes that to an extreme. She really, fits with that part of Hattie, because Kiki is an artist. She's always painting something, designing something. She dresses really funky. She did a semester abroad in England and came back, with wearing all the punk rock garb and stuff. So I love her. And then I love contrasting her with Granddaddy, who is, the irascible, old guy that, grew up in the mountains, and, he's still mad at the sheriff because the sheriff arrested his dad for moonshining back during Prohibition. And, but he taught Hattie how to moonshine, and he whittles, and so he's very, very Southern, very old fashioned. And then her other friend, Kate, is kind of the straight man. She's not boring. I would, definitely not say the character is boring, but she's very reasonable, very rational. She's the one that's just had the baby. She's going to kind of be the one, trying to kind of rein Hattie in and make her think twice before doing things. And I think we all need a friend like that too, that, wait a minute, you may not want to be stepping off that cliff. So it's been fun creating that cast. And then Marlon, he kind of waltzed into my mind, or rode into my mind on the police horse. I thought, what do I want to do to make him, kind of different from just an everyday police officer? I thought that'd be fun to put him on a horse. And Chattanooga is just a beautiful, beautiful city. Have you ever been there?
I have not. I've heard it's awesome though.
Yeah. It was not on my radar really, or bucket list, until we moved to Nashville. Kind of surprisingly, we had never necessarily planned to move to Nashville, but my husband's company closed down his department, and then he got a job there. So we moved there, and we loved Nashville. It's a beautiful place there too. But we decided, hey, let's, kind of explore this area. And let's go to Chattanooga and go to the Chattanooga Choo Choo Motel. And we actually stayed there, which was really, really fun. But I love that city. It's gorgeous. It's got a population of around 180,000. So it's a smaller city compared to a lot of the ones in Texas we were used to. Dallas and Fort Worth are huge. I lived in Houston. Houston's huge. Austin's big. So to us, it feels definitely like a small city, and it has a lot of natural beauty. There's the big Tennessee River, which is really wide, that weaves around the town. And then you've got the mountains in the distance, the Great Smoky Mountains, which Smokey the cat is named after. So it was a beautiful place, and I wanted to make her love the natural beauty of it. Her grandparents had a cabin up in the mountains, and she lives there now. So I've played on that some, but I didn't want to make it overly only Southern, only that way. So that's why, thought it'd be fun to put Kiki in there with her, punk rock stuff and all that. And, kind of mix things up a bit, and even Hattie, even though she was raised there, she's kind of more of an everyday person. She's not, she didn't ride horses like Marlon did when he was young. She's very business minded with, and very, pro women doing things and very self-assured and very modern ways of thinking, which I don't know that the South is necessarily slower in that, but I do think even to this day, there's still a little bit of a Southern belle, mentality. I was raised that if I didn't have my toenails painted, it was should have been a felony. So we even when my sisters and I would get together, we'd be visiting our mom, we'd all do it. We jokingly do a toenail check. Are all of our toenails painted? So I wanted Hattie to be Southern, but not feeling like she has to adhere to old fashioned Southern values that are kind of outdated now.
I think you're right. Talking about reader expectations, as we were earlier about the cozy mysteries, I think like you said, if we lean too far into the Southern mentality, which, I like that too. I grew up in the South. I'm here in Texas, but I think that it can ostracize some people a bit. So it's important to kind of have different viewpoints too, in order to feel a little more well-rounded.
It can also feel a little too stereotypical too. It's like, I want to celebrate some of the things I love about the South, but also I want to sometimes break away from the old ways of thinking. And because the South raised a lot of very strong women, and sometimes they don't always get the limelight like they should, but, as opposed to the rescue me Southern belle, Scarlett O'Hara kind of.
Exactly. We're a lot tougher than we look, even with painted toenails, guys. So we've talked so much about your amazing series and all your cozy mysteries. Where can listeners find your books and how can they connect with you?
So my books are everywhere they're traditionally published. So you'll find them in Barnes & Noble. You'll find them in Amazon, Books A Million, Powell's, indie bookstores. Other than my Busted series. My Busted series is my indie series. So that one, Amazon, Nook, you can get them Kobo, that type of, ebooks, Apple Books. And then as far as where I am online, I have an author Diane Kelly page, and Diane is spelled Diane, and Kelly is Kelly. And then I'm at Diane Kelly Books on Twitter, Instagram, and I recently joined TikTok, and that's been fun. I'm not one to sit there and talk a lot and make a lot of videos of myself, but I put my cat stuff up there and people seem to really enjoy that because my cats are entertainment constantly. One of my favorite ones I just posted recently was my two cats were playing hide and seek, and it was adorable. So if you're not on TikTok, get on TikTok and go look at that.
Well, it folds perfectly into your series with a cat, and it's your research, right?
Right. They are inspiration for those characters for sure.
There you go.
I don't know what we would do without them. And that's why my characters always have one. I mean, they're comic relief for our life. They give us something to focus on and cuddle up with when we've had a bad day. There are emotional support animals. Seriously. I know probably everyone who has a pet feels that way about them, that they bring so much to our lives.
And there you go. There's food for thought for any author, is just when you have an animal in a cozy mystery, that's your emotional support animal through that cozy, through that murder mystery right there. Thanks so much to Diane for joining the show. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. That way you're the first to hear new episodes when they drop. And if you get a chance, feel free to leave a review. It helps support the show and allows more opportunity to bring in all kinds of fantastic guests. There's also a link to the YouTube channel in the description if you'd like to see the interviews with some of the guests and see them show off their lovely books. Book recommendations for this episode: Primer and Punishment by Diane Kelly, and A Trip with Trouble by Diane Kelly. As always, stay safe, be well, and keep writing. Bye!